This week on Real Faith, we'll be reviewing the literary drama Anna Karenina, the Bradley Cooper-Jennifer Lawrence pairing, Silver Linings Playbook, and Hitchcock, starring Anthony Hopkins as the legendary movie director. All that and more coming up on Real Faith, film reviews you can have faith in.
I have to tell you.
Yes.
I have to tell you, you behaved improperly today.
How is that?
By making plain your feeling when one of the riders fell. Your conduct was improper. It must not occur again. I have said it before. You will say my concern is unnecessary and ridiculous. You are my wife. I'm wrong to think that. Yes? Perhaps I was mistaken.
No. You were not mistaken. I love him. I am his mistress.
Keira Knightley confesses her sins to Jude Law in the latest adaptation of Leo Tolstoy's masterpiece, Anna Karenina. But is this film a classic? Welcome, I'm David DeSerto, former reviewer for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops' Office for Film and Broadcasting.
And I'm Stephen Gradanis, film critic for the National Catholic Register and creator of DecentFilms.com. And this is Real Faith, the movie review show where we'll be looking at movies through a Catholic lens. You know, Leo Tolstoy is arguably the greatest of the Russian novelists, and Anna Karenina is arguably his greatest novel, and it's certainly one of the most filmed. There have been at least a dozen adaptations of it, two starring Greta Garbo, one starring Vivian Leigh. And yet, in spite of that, I think this is still a very unfamiliar story to many people, for many viewers. This film is going to be their introduction to the story of Anna Karenina. I know that it was for me, so the story is still very much unknown to a lot of people. Set amid the privileged class of 19th century Tsarist Russia, the film stars Knightley as the titular adulteress, whose affair with Aaron Taylor Johnston's dashing young Count Vronsky erupts in scandal and humiliation for her pious but emotionally disconnected statesman husband, Alexei, played by Jude Law. Directed by Joe Wright, the film features a stellar supporting cast, including Matthew Macfadyen, who played Darcy in Wright's Pride and Prejudice as Anna's philandering brother, Oblonsky, Kelly MacDonald, the voice of Brave's Princess Merida, as Oblonsky's long-suffering wife, Dolly. The Harry Potter films, Bill Weasley, Domhnall Gleeson as Levin, an ardent young landowner in love with young Kitty, played by Swedish actress Alicia Vikander.
You know, Stephen, I went into this film not knowing what to expect, but I absolutely love this film. It's the kind of old-fashioned, handsomely crafted costume drama that Hollywood generally loves to celebrate, particularly come Oscar time. Only this one's filmed in a slightly unconventional manner, taking place almost completely within a soundstage. But leaving the screening, what really struck me is I was wondering how modern audiences would respond to it, and would it make sense to them in our post-Christian, post-marriage age, where sadly adultery does not scandalize people anymore. In fact, sadly, the opposite is true, that what scandalizes high society is the defense of traditional marriage.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think that what Wright has done here and the unconventional approach to filming this particular story is part of the success in bridging the gap between Leo Tolstoy's world and our modern world today. This is Joe Wright's third literary adaptation, the third one starring Keira Knightley, after, I think, the very successful Pride and Prejudice.
And Atonement.
And Atonement, which I was much less keen on. But what he's done here is he's done to reimagine Anna Karenina as a British stage drama, which you're dealing here with an 800-page novel, 800 pages plus. It's in Russian, and there's just a cognitive gap there. But by making it a stage play, by having an audience in a theater with backdrops and props.
It actually opens with a curtain rising on a proscenium.
Yes, but by doing all of that, we're able to accept the artifice of the movie taken one step further, and it really draws us into the world of the story. It also allows for an enormous amount of compression. Events can be gestured at, not everything has to be shown, and as a result, they're able to include more of the story, elements that have been left out in other film stories. For instance, not only do we have the very unhappy triangle of Anna, her husband Karenin, and her lover Alexei Count Vronsky. But we also have, as a counterpoint to that, the much happier, ultimately, much happier relationship between Kitty and Kitty's admirer Levin, who is an old friend of Anna's philandering brother. You need that the chance for happiness, the possibility of happiness, as a counterpoint for the unhappy triangle, just to illustrate the truth of the famous opening sentence that every happy family is alike, all unhappy families are alike in their own way.
Yeah, I absolutely love the theatrical artifice of the whole production, where they actually have a steeplechase horse race with live horses running across the stage, but they also have little miniature trains passing by the camera that signify Anna's travels from Moscow to St. Petersburg. You know, Levin is actually, I feel, the emotional and the spiritual core of the film, and there are quite a number of spiritual themes running throughout the story. In fact, right at the front of the film, Anna's husband, Karenin, says that all sin has a price, and really the rest of the film is an affirmation of that truism.
It's a spiritual film. It's a visually gorgeous film. The self-conscious theatricality has caused some people to compare it to Baz Luhrmann's Moulin Rouge, but where that was very disciplined and in a way very dissipated. Here, I think the technique is much more controlled. It really serves the story. And this is a morally serious story. It's a morally serious telling of the story. It's not a moralizing film. It's not a film that puts a message out there, but it deals with the moral choices that these characters make and their consequences in serious ways.
Well, I think one of the pivotal scenes takes place at a high society dinner party where, again, Jude Law's Karenin is present, and they're discussing infidelity and adultery, and he just silences the guests by simply uttering the commandment, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife," to which young Levin adds that sensual desire indulged for its own sake is the misuse of something sacred, and then goes on to explain how we fulfill our humanness through committed marital love. And what a countercultural message that is for our day and age, where we're constantly brainwashed by modernity that indulging our sexual appetites is what makes us human, whereas here it's saying it makes us less than human.
And in having those themes being discussed in that context at a fancy dinner, we really see the social dimension of sin. Sin isn't just something that affects private persons. This is also something that goes very much to the stage metaphor, the theater metaphor. You know, Shakespeare said all the life's a stage. That was particularly true maybe of Tolstoy in his time. That was part of the inspiration for the film, that these people in Russia, in high society at this time, they were self-consciously living on a stage. They were living in full view of the public. They wore costumes, fashions borrowed from French high couture, and their lives were really lived in full view. So when sin like this occurred, it wasn't just a matter of a betrayal between two persons. There was also a public scandal. There was bad example given to others. There was public embarrassment for the innocent party, the wronged party, and there were naturally public consequences, because when you have public sin without public consequences, you know, society falls apart.
Now, while the film is a 19th century period piece, it is rated R. Obviously, the mature themes, there is some sensuality with some non-explicit nudity, and obviously there is a brief bloody image and a suicide.
You know, one of Tolstoy's translators said that one of the themes that comes through in this story is that you cannot build your happiness on another person's sorrow. I think that that's something that the movie gets across really clearly. Coming up after the break, Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence look for a silver lining, and Anthony Hopkins goes psycho. Next on Real Faith.
So is this the girl you wrote about?
Yeah.
What? You wrote about me? I'm the girl?
He wrote about you, all right.
What did he say?
He said you guys was helping each other out, and you were nice, and you You had a mouth on you, but...
Whoa, okay,
You're a little
okay.
mouthy, but...
No, please, tell me more about what he said in the letter.
Yeah, anything you want to know, I'll just tell you in the letter. It was nothing about it. It was just a very general letter.
Cool.
She's fine.
She is my friend with an F.
A capital F. She's fine.
For friend.
Yeah.
Well, last time we encountered Bradley Cooper, he was hanging out with Zach Galifianakis and Mike Tyson.
Don't remind me.
He surrounded himself with a slightly more upscale cast this time, and he has a little bit more to worry about than just a hangover. Here, Cooper plays Pat, the former school teacher at the center of director David O. Russell's story, based on the novel by Matthew Quick. After spending 8 months in a psychiatric facility for a violent episode triggered by finding his wife Nikki in flagrante delicto with a coworker, Pat's back home living with his parents, Robert De Niro and Jackie Weaver, and fixated on patching things up with an absent, estranged Nikki. Then he meets Jennifer Lawrence's Tiffany, a kindred soul of sorts with serious emotional issues of her own. Tiffany promises to help Pat reach out to Nikki if Pat will agree to be her dance partner in an upcoming competition. Adding to the overall dysfunction, which touches most, if not all, the characters, Pat's father labors with a history of rage, OCD, and gambling problems as he tries to make enough money betting on football to start a new family business.
It's just like my family.
Well, like they said, every family is unhappy in its own way.
You know, there is quite a bit to like about this film. I'm not sure that I always like the characters, but I find that I'm always sympathetic toward them, and I'm kind of rooting toward them. And for a film to bring that kind of empathy to characters that are this dysfunctional is really saying something. And it's funny, too. There's a scene that I think anyone who has known someone who has those manic depressive swings will definitely relate to, where Pat comes storming into his parents' room at 3 o'clock in the morning, raging about the ending of Ernest Hemingway's Farewell to Arms, which he's been reading because it was one of the books that his ex-wife or his estranged wife assigned to her students at school. And he just can't believe the misery of the ending. And he says, you know, why can't there just be a happy ending? That's kind of a signal where the movie may be going. And if I have a reservation about the film, it's where this movie chooses to look for its happy ending. And you've got this character, Pat, who is estranged from his wife, and he just wants nothing more in the world than to get back together with her. That's a wholesome goal, even though the movie makes a point that he's kind of obsessing in an unhealthy way over it, and he's projected a sort of fantasy relationship with her that doesn't really exist in the 8 months that he's been in the psychiatric institution. And while Jennifer Lawrence's character, Tiffany, is certainly a likable character, you know, she's not his wife. And that's something that matters more to me, I think, than it did to the filmmakers.
Yeah, you know, I agree with you pretty much across the board. Both Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence are likable in their roles. You know, Jennifer Lawrence, we both loved in Winter's Bone, and obviously she's been catapulted to stardom through Hunger Games. Here, she may not be a manic pixie dream girl. She may be a little manic depressive pixie dream girl. But what I didn't like, though, how the film kind of establishes that dysfunction is the new normal. I mean, there isn't any normal character in this film. It's just varying degrees of dysfunction. The father, Robert De Niro, is probably the most dysfunctional of them all. At least the Bradley Cooper character is trying to put the pieces of his life back together again. Robert De Niro doesn't even seem to be self-aware that he has really any issues.
Well, that's the same for his son, too. The one truly self-aware character in the film is Jennifer Lawrence. She sees how profoundly needy and messed up she is. Bradley Cooper is in delusion and denial. He thinks he's fine. He thinks he's in recovery.
I do like, though, how the film does treat the whole subject of mental illness with sensitivity and a fair amount of humor, and it really tries to inject humanity and not just paint them as, you know, just crazy people. You know, these are people who are struggling with serious issues. And I also do like how the film does show the devastating emotional toll of adultery. But I'm right on board with you that that's not enough of a silver lining to erase the fact that the end of the movie essentially asks you to root against him ever getting together with his wife, and in effect cheers on even further adultery.
Yeah, you know, it really comes down to this one speech by Robert De Niro where he basically says, you know, whether your wife ever loved you, she doesn't love you like this girl does. And it's like that's the only thing that matters. And it's not.
The film is rated R for quite a bit of strong language and profanity. There is some sexual content, surprisingly none between the Cooper character and Jennifer Lawrence's character, but there is a scene where he comes home and discovers his wife in the shower with the coworker.
Yeah, and that shower sequence is also the one bit of violence in the film. He attacks the coworker and almost kills him, and that's what lands him in the psychiatric institution. I do have to say, I appreciated the movie's general restraint on sexuality other than that scene. Well, while we're on the topic of violent shower scenes, in Hitchcock, Anthony Hopkins delves into the darker side of filmmaking and human nature.
Just think of the shock value. Killing off your leading lady halfway through. I mean, you are intrigued, are you not, my dear? Come on, admit it. Admit it.
Actually, I think it's a huge mistake. You shouldn't wait till halfway through. Kill her off after 30 minutes.
Wow.
You know, just the idea of Anthony Hopkins playing Alfred Hitchcock, I think, is almost more intriguing than anything that the film could actually deliver, although I do really like that scene. Taking place in 1959, Hitchcock has Hopkins playing an aging master of suspense who, searching to reinvent himself and prove he's not washed up as a director, makes the unconventional decision to bring Robert Bloch's morbid novel Psycho, inspired by real-life killer Ed Gein, to the big screen as his next project, against the advice of studio bosses and his supportive wife and collaborator, Alma, played by Helen Mirren. James D'Arcy plays Anthony Perkins, the actor who immortalized the creepy Norman Bates in the 1960 film, and Scarlett Johansson plays Janet Leigh, whose ill-fated lodger forever changed the way we look at showers.
You know, in many ways, this film is reminiscent of Steven Spielberg's recent Lincoln. Both films open with the subject matter already achieving iconic status, Lincoln being the great emancipator and Hitchcock being the undisputed master of suspense at the top of his game. Both films are both not so much biographies as they are snapshots of defining moments in these larger-than-life figures' careers. The passing of the 13th Amendment, and here the making of perhaps Hitchcock's arguably his most famous film.
Yeah, and both also star great British actors giving magnificent performances as these iconic figures. You know, the making of Psycho really is a very pivotal moment, not only for Alfred Hitchcock, but in Hollywood history. You know, this was at a point in his career where Hitchcock really had nothing to prove. He was the undisputed master of suspense. He had other projects being offered to him,
including the initial James Bond film, Casino Royale.
Yes, which he turned down because he just made North by Northwest. He didn't want to make a spy movie. He wanted to make something different. And Psycho was certainly something different. At this point in history, it was a controversial film. That not only the studio bosses, but the Hollywood censors were against it. He couldn't get funding for it. He had to mortgage his house in order to fund the film himself. The movies had never shown a toilet before. And there's a toilet in that shower scene that's very significant that he had to argue for. So there's a lot of interesting Hollywood history here. The film was originally rated, Psycho, on its release, was rated morally offensive by the Catholic Film Board at the time, the predecessor to your former employer, the USCCB Office for Film and Broadcasting.
Yeah, it really is a seminal film in many ways that, you know, for good or bad, really ushered in a new acceptability of sexuality and violence on screen, and really can be seen as the grandfather for the modern slasher film.
And yet, this film really isn't so much about the making of Psycho. There was a wealth of material in the book that the movie is based on that doesn't make it into the film. And it's not really even so much a portrait of Alfred Hitchcock. What it really is a picture of a marriage. It's a somewhat dysfunctional marriage. The movie certainly has fun not only with Hitchcock's macabre sense of humor, which his wife shared, obviously, but also with his passion for the beautiful blondes that he cast in film after film, which we see his wife certainly did not share that partiality for. She's embarrassed, she's humiliated, she's neglected, and it isn't until the end that the movie comes around to a sort of tidy, happy ending and affirms that not only is she Alfred Hitchcock's life partner, but also his indispensable film collaborator as well.
Yeah, it really does shed light on a little-known figure. There's so much literature on Hitchcock that it's nice to spend a little time learning about Alma. When Hitchcock was actually honored by the Academy, though he never actually won an Oscar, he said that he only wanted to thank 4 people, a scriptwriter, an editor, the mother of his child, and a cook, and they were all named Alma. I also like how it does pay tribute to the important role that his composer, Bernard Herrmann, played in this film. In fact, one scene, originally, Hitchcock didn't want any music in the shower scene, and then they play it with the iconic screeching violins, where I can imagine that scene without that musical narration.
That was a nice insight. I do have to say, while Anthony Hopkins gives the performances all, he can't really impersonate Hitchcock in the way that Daniel Day-Lewis did Lincoln, and a lot of it comes down to the voice. Hitchcock had such a distinctive voice, and Hopkins just can't bring that to life. And in fact, you really see him, I think, as Anthony Hopkins, particularly in a couple of moments where his Silence of the Lambs role, Hannibal Lecter, almost flickers to the screen.
You also heard a little touch of John Houseman in the impersonation as well. The film is rated PG-13 for some mature thematic elements. Obviously, there are some simulated scenes of violence during the filming of Psycho, and some language. But overall, it's pretty clear of any objectionable content. You can even bring your mother to it.
Yeah, you know, this isn't a particularly insightful character portrayal. It's not a great film on Hollywood history, but it's always an enjoyable romp when Hollywood makes a film about its favorite subject, which is, of course, itself.
On deck, we'll deck the halls with another holiday movie with a message. So stay tuned for more Real Faith on Net.
Welcome back. It's time for another holiday movie with a message. As always, our guide is Father Robert Lauder.
This week, a Yuletide classic from Christmas past. Father Lauder, it's all yours.
Thanks, guys. Today, for our movie with a message with a Christmas background, I've chosen a classic, a film version of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. The particular version that I've chosen stars Alistair Sim. There are a number of versions. Every Christmas, a friend of mine and I get into an argument about whether the Alistair Sim version or the George C. Scott version, which was done for television, is better. The George C. Scott version is terrific. However, it is in color, and the Alistair Sim is in black and white, and I think it just works. You know, maybe it's because I saw it before I saw the George C. Scott, I'm not sure, and maybe it's because I'm a special fan of Alistair Sim. I first saw him in a Hitchcock movie, which I think was entitled Stage Fright, starring Jane Wyman and Marlene Dietrich. And I'd never seen him before. I remember I saw the movie with my sister, and we both found him very, very funny. And then after that, a number of British films started coming into this country, and he was in a number of terrific comedies. So he plays this role extremely well. When I was growing up, every year on the radio, I would listen to Lionel Barrymore do this. And that was very good. But this film, it's just dark enough. I think certain films just work better in black and white. You think of the film noir, the detective stories, you know, that have a heroine who's kind of a femme fatale. Maybe the main character is kind of not quite completely moral. It seems to me it's pretty much impossible to make a film noir, which means, you know, dark film, in color. Color just is too cheerful. And that's why I think that's one reason I like the Alistair Sim version better. No matter what version of Christmas Carol I watch, the scene in which Scrooge tells the man who works for him, Bob Cratchit, that if Bob Cratchit will allow him, he'd like to help him bring up Tiny Tim, who is the crippled son of Bob Cratchit. I tell you, I cannot watch that scene without filling up. It's so very, very touching, and it fits right in with the theme of the movie. We ought to care about one another. When I was in the seminary, we had an English course, and I guess I was in fourth year college, second year at the major seminary. We were hoping to have a Christmas party in the class, in the English class, and the English professor came in and he said, "I can't do that, but I will read to you a Christmas carol." And I think there's room in Christmas for this type of literature. And I remember thinking, I didn't think so. It didn't deal directly with the incarnation, didn't have anything really very specific about Jesus Christ. And now I disagree with myself. I think there is plenty of room for this. Even though it is not specifically focusing on the Christian mystery, it is focusing on brotherly love. I would say that the message is we ought to love one another. We ought to be concerned about one another. Now, of course, we can build on that, and when we bring in Christ, of course, that's the ultimate meaning of Christmas. But for those who maybe are not ready for that, or perhaps are not believing Christians, I still think that the Christmas comes around every year is terrific. People are different. And that's what this version of the Christmas Carol captures. that Alistair Sim as Scrooge undergoes a conversion. He will never treat people the way he does at the beginning of the movie. He's now concerned. As a matter of fact, I think the last line of the film might be, and Scrooge kept Christmas in a wonderful way. I think you'll love this one.
You know, Stephen, much like Anna Karenina, Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol has been adapted multiple times to both the big and small screen. In fact, there's been no less than 22 adaptations of this film, the earliest one being a 1901 British short. You know, to the other ones that Father mentioned, I would say that my personal favorite is the 1970 musical version starring Albert Finney with an Oscar-nominated score by Leslie Bricusse.
You know, I don't know that I've ever seen a bad version of A Christmas Carol. Unlike Anna Karenina, I have seen a bunch. The one that I grew up, of course, with was Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol.
Oh, great one.
More recently, I've just become a fan of the Muppet Christmas Carol.
Oh,
Also,
Michael Caine is probably the best Scrooge out there.
I even liked the one with Jim Carrey. I liked all the Christmas carols that they put in the background. You know, it's easy to feel like you have a secular Christmas story here, and we see so many of these that completely desacralize the holiday, but A Christmas Carol doesn't do that. It's not about the incarnation, as Father said, but in many of the versions, and including the original story, the Christmas story, the true Christmas story, is there around the edges. There are references to the child born in Bethlehem. There are
Particularly in this version.
And in many of them on the soundtrack, you do hear Christmas carols. And no less of a Catholic apologist than G.K. Chesterton has defended A Christmas Carol as being a true defense, not exactly of the meaning of Christmas, but of the way that Christians have historically celebrated it and the merriness of the holiday. And I think in our desacralized society where people are almost afraid to say Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays has become the expression of choice, and let alone Christmas trees, even snowflakes have become too sectarian for some public schools. I think anything that affirms Christmas as enthusiastically as A Christmas Carol does is something to recommend.
A lesser-known fact is in 1849, Charles Dickens actually penned a retelling of the gospel narratives, which he called The Life of Our Lord, and which he forbid to be published for over 85 years. And while A Christmas Carol is infused more with a broad humanism than a creedal Christian orthodoxy, it definitely echoes the enduring ideals of the gospel.
You know, one of my favorite things about A Christmas Carol is that it's an indispensable predecessor to my all-time favorite Christmas film, which of course is It's a Wonderful Life. There also the Christian story is seen around the edges, and while the Scrooge figure is not redeemed, the hero of the film is the Bob Cratchit figure, and I think that's the way it should be.
And now to recap this week's movie reviews.
Joe Wright's boldly theatrical staging of Anna Karenina is a visually sumptuous distillation of some of Tolstoy's most potent story elements and themes. A film that treats love and betrayal, forgiveness and consequences in a way that's morally serious without moralizing.
Despite likable leads and frank humor about human frailty, Silver Linings Playbook doesn't offer enough of a silver lining to clean the tarnish from the film's problematic ending that asks viewers to root against marital reconciliation.
More froth than substance, Hitchcock doesn't offer deep insights into the legendary filmmaker or behind-the-scenes secrets about the making of Psycho, but it's a fairly enjoyable, if conventional, tale about Hollywood's favorite subject, itself. Join us next week when we'll be reviewing director Peter Jackson's highly anticipated return to Middle-earth in part 1 of The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey.
Until next time, I'm David DeSerto.
And I'm Stephen Greydonis, and that's a wrap on Real Faith.